So today we're going to do our first day of entremets. Entremet is a French term. It's going to be a mousse layer cake that has a minimum of 4 different fillings on the inside. And the exciting part is it's going to be no higher than 1.5 inches. So we're going to have to learn to assemble everything in very even, thin layers. And the key to a beautiful entremet is when you slice into it, all the layers are the exact same thickness and very, very level. Now, there's some keys that we're gonna do when we need to know our objectives for an entremet. First is any type of mousse needs to have either a pâte à bâton, which is an aerated cooked egg yolk and sugar base, because that will really firm up a mousse, or the mousse or Bavarian has to have gelatin in it. Entremet is always unmolded, so we need to make sure that the entremet does not start to melt once it comes to room temperature and it's ready for service. So one, mousse has to be solidified with gelatin or the term pâte à bâton, which we learned in another entremet. I'm looking at my hair right now and it's real big, so I'm sorry. It's probably, hopefully you're not staring at that. So that is our first objective. The second objective with an entremet is we're gonna learn to build it upside down. We're gonna build in a cake ring. The advantage of a cake ring is we get very straight sides, and when we go upside down, we're gonna invert it before we start to decorate it, so we're gonna get the flattest top possible so that we don't have to worry about coming back with a knife and leveling it. So, objective 1, mousses are solidified. Objective 2, build in a cake ring. Objective 3, we're gonna learn to build from the bottom up. So the bottom layer that we put in first is gonna end up to be the top layer. It's kind of like when you do a pineapple upside down cake, the glaze goes down first and then the batter, and then we invert. Our next objective is, again, make sure that every layer is started to thicken or completely set. We're gonna introduce a new term today called a coulis, C-O-U-L-I-S. A coulis is a French term for a strained puree. We're gonna do a raspberry coulis, and this coulis is gonna give us beautiful, vibrant pop of color on the inside and a beautiful flavor. So it's gonna be a little bit chewier than a mousse, so it's a different texture, it's a different color, and it's gonna bring in a beautiful new flavor profile for us. Now a coulis is really made of 3 things. It's made of some type of puree. We're gonna do raspberry today. It's made of sugar, and it needs a binder, so it's gonna have gelatin in it. The one thing about this coulis, it's now considered an inlay, I-N-L-A-Y. An inlay is, again, a hidden layer that you don't see until you slice into the product. When we start to build, you're gonna see the cake that we're gonna use is an inlay, because nothing is visible except for the body of the entremet, and the body of the entremet is the main flavor. With this one, it's gonna be a white chocolate Bavarian, so you won't see any other filling until we slice into it. So everything else is called an inlay. Now back to the coulis. The coulis, again, those 3 ingredients, we bloom the gelatin, we heat the 3 together, the puree, the sugar, and the gelatin, until the gelatin's melted and the sugar is dissolved. But then what we have to do is pour it into a mold and then freeze it solid. Otherwise, the inlay, we will never be able to pick it up. So this is one of those inlays that is gonna be completely frozen. Believe it or not, I'm also gonna use my cake frozen, so that when I put it in, again, it's gonna go level. It won't go with any type of ridges to it. So almost every inlay that we put in is gonna be frozen. I'm using a raspberry mousse on the inside of this entremet also. It's not gonna be frozen, but it's gonna start to be set. And to make sure it's perfectly level, I could put it in a mold, freeze it, and then place it in. If I was doing a large production, I would do that, and then I could just pop them out like a poker chip or a disc and start to lay them in. But I'm gonna use a pastry bag today, and then I'm just going to pipe in. And so again, because I'm using the pastry bag, my layer will be nice and thin. But if you're doing major production, or if your shift is almost over, you didn't get to build the entremet, and a mousse is on the inside of it, go ahead, freeze it, then we can then pick it up and put it in the inlay, and then again, it will be perfectly level. So we need to build upside down. We need to have the body, and again, the body is the main flavor. You're gonna see me start to pull it up the sides, because again, I want all the inlays to be hidden. And then once I get this built, you're gonna see that I'm gonna freeze it solid. So in the blast chiller, it's gonna need about 2 hours. If you don't have a blast chiller, entremets are usually always made the day before or maybe a week before, because they need at least 24 hours in the freezer to make sure it freezes solid. When we start to garnish these entremets, again, we're gonna learn in this section how to do mirror glaze, we're gonna do a clear glaze, we're gonna do velvet spray, the most popular garnishing techniques that you see. But when we start to garnish, the entremets need to be completely frozen, because mirror glaze goes on hot. If I were to enrobe in ganache, it goes on hot. Velvet spray goes on hot. So again, if my glaze is hot and my mousse is just cold or room temperature, it's gonna start to melt the entremet, or it's gonna start to marbleize in. So key, we're gonna build upside down. We're gonna freeze until it's completely solid, and then we're gonna do all garnishing when the entremet is frozen firm all the way through, okay? So mise en place is set. I'm just gonna take the camera in. It was a little noisy in there, so now I'm just gonna move the camera over. Okay, so I'm ready to go, and so let's get our mise en place set. All my components are ready. So the first thing you'll notice is I have a half pan and I have it upside down. That's so that the cake will start to sit level, and I'm gonna put a guitar sheet down. Now I could use a Silpat, but then I might get a little bit of texture on my the top of my cake, so I'm gonna use this guitar sheet so that it'll be perfectly smooth. Now to make sure that my entremet comes out, I'm gonna line my inside of my cake ring with an acetate strip. Now the first thing to go down is the body of my entremet, and that is my white chocolate Bavarian. So you can see I've had it start to set up a little bit, and now what we need to do is start to pull this up the sides. So I'm just going to use my bench scraper, and this small little yellow one is perfect for inside of an entremet. And so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just pulling this up because what I'm trying to do is to create an area so that all my inlays will be hidden, so that when I mold this, all you're going to see is the white chocolate Bavarian. So I've got this pulled up the sides. Now if at some point your mousse is a little bit thin and it starts to drip down, don't worry, because after this is all assembled, I can pipe in a little bit more of my Bavarian or my mousse so that you can't see any of the inlays. So I had one little gap right there, so I'm just going to fill that in with my Bavarian. The next layer to go in is my De Croix, and so this is frozen, so I'm just going to place it and put it right in. Make sure that it's level, and you'll notice I didn't fuss too much about the white chocolate Bavarian because I knew that this cake would actually level off the Bavarian when I put it in. My next layer to go down is going to add another color and another flavor profile. So this is my raspberry mousse. And you'll notice this one I'm just going to pipe in. And I'm piping it right on top of the cake because, again, I don't want to see any of the other colors when I unmold this. So you'll notice I'm not going too close to the edge. So that looks great. Now, my next layer to go in, this is what I was talking about, was the coulis. Remember, the coulis is the puree that's been thickened, and that also is going to go in frozen. So I'm just going to run to the freezer now, and I'm going to grab my coulis, and then I'll come back and I'll place that. Okay. Now I went ahead and I grabbed my coulis from the freezer, and look at this. It's like a hockey puck right now. But once it thaws, this is going to be perfect so your fork can just scoop right through it. But once you thaws again, you're going to see why we had to freeze it, because it becomes quite soft. So my coulis is just going to go right in. Again, you can't see it, it's hidden. I'm going to put just the tiniest amount of Bavarian right here, and this will act as glue. Because since I'm building this upside down, my last layer to go in is something to keep my entremet from sliding on the plate. So here's where I'm going to add my second layer of cake. So I have texture inside my entremet twice. I have one cake layer in the inside, and now look, I'm going to place my second cake layer. And I'm just going to press down. And you can see I've done this nicely because my cake is not going above my, my cake ring. Now what I want to do is fill in any gaps So I have a little bit of white chocolate Bavarian, I saved it. So now what I'm gonna do is just fill in this gap between the cake and the cake ring. So that again, when I unmold this, I won't be able to see any of the inlays. And now I'm just protecting my inlays from the freezer. And when we're in class, this might be as far as we get because you're working by yourself and you have, now you can see you have 4 components that we have to build. And now I'm just gonna take my bench scraper and scrape this so it's level with the cake ring. And then guys, this is gonna go into the freezer until it's quite firm and solid all the way through. So in the blast, this would be about an hour. When you're in class, I'm just making sure I'm nice and level. In class, we'll be freezing this overnight until we come back from the next, when we come back to our next class. So this, ready to go. I'm gonna pop it into the blast freezer for about an hour, hour and a half, and I'll check it. So my entremet is nice and frozen, so what I need to do now is start to unmold this. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just hit it with a little bit of a torch, and that will just loosen it from the cake ring. Okay, now we'll take a peek, see if this works. I'm gonna put just a little bit of a cup there. I'm going to flip this over and look how beautifully flat that top is, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So I still need to hit it a little bit more with this torch because I want the cake ring to just slide off without melting too much of the mousse. Now you'll see I have a little Bavarian that's hanging over the edge of the cake ring. Again, I'm not worried about that because that's going to come off when the cake ring slides down. So it's halfway down. It's on one side, and there we go. So cake ring is away. Look how beautiful that is. Now, just how we learned in mousses and Bavarians in Patisserie 1, we have to repeat the procedure in that we have to protect the Bavarian from starting to dry out. But in order for us to decorate this, one, I need to remove my acetate. And now what I'm going to do first is we're going to use the simplest of the techniques. We're going to use just a clear mirror glaze. And this is a mirror glaze that you buy. It comes in a bucket. It's imported from France. But when you do this, you want to make sure not to stir it too much, because if you stir it, you're going to get a lot of air bubbles. And those air bubbles are actually going to show on the surface of the cake. So again, you can see that my entremet needs to be completely frozen, because if it wasn't, it would just start to marbleize in with my mirror glaze. Now I'm putting on just a thin coat, so you saw for the whole top of that cake, it was just about 1 tablespoon of mirror glaze. So I'm going to take about a teaspoon, and I'm just going to work this around the edge. We want to go as minimally as possible, because when mirror glaze can warm up, when you serve this, it can start to drip. So we don't want to put too much on. We want just enough for a little bit of shine and to protect the side of the cake. So the whole side took me maybe 2 teaspoons to decorate. I'm just going to go over one more time, make sure it's nice and even. And then I'm going to start to decorate my white chocolate raspberry entremet. So this looks good. Now the first thing I'm going to do is decorate the sides. So there's many things that we could decorate the sides with. We could do macarons and just leave them without sandwiching them. I went ahead and made some plaquettes. So I'm going to do the plaquette at a diamond. So you can see here's my first one. It fits perfectly, straight from the bottom to the top. Now I'm just going to match my points, and I'm going to work my way around the cake. I'm trying to do it upside down. There we go. So there's my 2. And so I'm just going to do this all the way around. just went ahead and finished decorating this. So I have my plaquettes on the side. I went ahead and did a chocolate fan. I have some dried meringue. I have some pieces of fruit. And so this one we kept pretty simplistic, but it looks beautiful. So this cake, it's an 8-inch entremet. It would sell for about $60 to $65. Again, the key to the entremet was we built it upside down, and then look how the top is so beautiful and so flat. I built it, I let it freeze completely. I put a little bit of mirror glaze on it, and then I went ahead and I garnished the sides and then the top. So I'm just gonna take a slice out so that you can see the layers, and then when you're in class, this is our first one we're gonna build, our white chocolate raspberry entremet. Now I cut the center, and look, my layers are nice and level, so my cake is the same thickness as my raspberry coulis, as my raspberry mousse, and then you can see again, all the inlays are hidden until we slice into it. So what we would do now is let this come just above room temperature. So when it comes from the freezer, I would let it temper in the cooler for about an hour, and then it's ready for service.